It's hard to ignore the fact that the Marvel brand is everywhere, and that's all down to the current owners of the company forcing down as much awareness as possible. This can be both a good and bad thing, especially if the current product ends up being more than mediocre. However, the 90s were a different time when they remained big yet were given equal prominence along with other brands. Although it was at its worst time period due to the financial issues that arose for a while.
Yeah, Marvel nearly suffered with bankruptcy, which is hard to imagine if you're used to seeing it as a big brand today. But not only did we have a Marvel that wasn't doing so financially well, but we did have the opposite of what Marvel was dominating in terms of visual media. Instead of a gigantic cinematic universe, we had a connected series of TV shows that aired on Fox Kids, a programming block that used to be a part of the Fox family. Before that was sold off to Disney way before Disney bought the 21st Century Fox as a whole. Wait, what's the name of the series again? Does it have a name like a DC animated universe?
Yeah, there hasn't been a definitive name for it. Some people call it the Marvel Action Universe, and others the Marvel Action Hour, but those apply specifically to the programming block that took place for 2 years. But since most of the Marvel shows connected to each other usually have to stay on a consistent channel, such as almost every 2010 show that belonged on Disney XD, I've decided to call it the Fox Kids Marvel Universe for simplicity's sake, as it describes the channel that the shows aired in at the time. We've got plenty of shows to discuss for this franchise, and with how there haven't been any major continuations for the series in a manner similar to the DCAU until now with X-Men 97, we'll focus on a compare-contrast segment, the two animated universes. We won't say which one is better, we will instead just show what makes each series similar or different from one another beyond the characters and branding.
And before you guys lax, no, we will not cover Biker Mice from Mars, due to it not being set in the same universe despite it being labeled as a part of the Marvel Action Hour thing that the 90s had. It's more likely how they used to collaborate with different companies to produce different shows based on IPs that aren't owned by Marvel themselves. Similar to when they published comics in the past and that didn't start Marvel characters. Also, quick, cringy, and shameless plug-in. If you're a fan of Blackflick, please follow my Instagram page, DC Blackflick. If you haven't, otherwise, where else do we begin with the Fox Kids Marvel Universe other than the X-Men series?
The X-Men series has remained a major part of the Marvel Universe. That is before Disney got stingy and forced licensees to not give attention to them just because Fox owned the rights to the characters in movies long ago. But before this movie universe nonsense went down, we got a juggernaut of a TV show a month after fellow god-tier superhero show Batman the Animated Series was released. After part of the X-Men came and went infrequently on syndication, it was about time for a full-on X-Men series to be made. When Margaret Lois got involved with Fox Kids in 1991, she immediately commissioned an X-Men show with 13 episodes produced by Saban Entertainment, the same company that would later adapt Super Sentai into Power Rangers. While there weren't enough people to help animate the show at first, it was decided that Grays would include the writers and storyboard artists, while the voice work was done with Canadian voice actors, and the animation was made in South Korea by ACOM. Initially, the series had to deal with a rushed production that led to the first episode being aired in an unfinished state. The same happened for another episode soon after, but eventually, quality control began to increase as a priority so as to avoid the same piles of animation errors that ACOM faced earlier when they did Season 3 of Transformers G1.
In spite of these early issues, X-Men the Animated Series was a massive hit with fans, providing a high number of ratings and further pushing back the need for more episodes. Before we go back to behind the scenes side of things, let's cover what makes the series memorable. First, social issues that were not frequently brought up on children's animation were focused on with the series, with the writers making sure they were both easy to understand yet retain the mature elements of the series. Religion, health issues, and mental well-being were among some of the discussions of the X-Men series. And even the Holocaust, a part of Magneto's origin story, was touched upon. In addition, the cast we got was pretty memorable, and it can't be further from the truth than that. Badass opening, proudly displaying the names of the X-Men members most briefly shown. Set characters also take inspiration from Jim Lee designs, which may have them feel more or less similar to the already established source material rather than deviating from what was established with a unique vision like Batman the Animated Series did.
It was great to see how each season, while still adapting the established comic lore, felt like it was the first time seeing everything unfold. The first season's war against both the Sentinels, Magneto, and Apocalypse, while the second season revolved around the relationship of Cyclops and Jean Grey, while Mr. Sinister went after them, as well as the new character Morph coming back and trying to turn everyone against each other. Things get crazier thanks to Jean Grey's transformation to the Dark Phoenix as the center of conflict in the third season, though while the first 3 seasons were pretty serialized, the 4th and 5th seasons by comparison were much more episodic. But yeah, there was a bit of back and forth between Fox and the people running the show apart from the animation, as the aforementioned change in storytelling was joined alongside the approach in making the show more kid-friendly in order to sell toys. If you remember back when Glenn Webb's channel was active before his untimely passing, he would review 90s Marvel toys and comment on how the mid to late 90s felt more in line with Toy Biz trying so hard to make the action figures more exciting than they really were when it came to the gimmicks, even going so far as making the subline gimmick more prominent than the X-Men logo. Between the show being told to make it more kid-friendly and the toys being more gimmicky, you can tell that the corporate wigs didn't really understand the X-Men series as well as the people running it.
Regardless, this was still a strong start to the Fox Kids Marvel universe, being not just the first time we got a low-key great show, but also one that spawned multiple other shows in the same style and world, which made things pretty exciting with the fact that Spider-Man and War Machine both cameo briefly in the Phoenix Saga, saving people as they always do. Both characters later appeared in their own shows, well, War Machine more so being an Iron Man show. Yeah, it's not entirely perfect series, as Jean Grey was pretty useless at times in spite of being one of the main characters. Also, every time Cyclops called yelling, "Jean!" I wish Wolverine got to take her away from him, but some stuff like that and the animation errors make things rough compared to the lesser known, but honestly, better X-Men Evolution. But this is a still great starting point for the franchise, much like how Batman was a great start for the DCAU, and hey, we got the iconic frame of Wolverine on his bed with a picture of Jean in his hand.
Now, this is where the Marvel Action Hour segment comes into play, with Iron Man and Fantastic Four sharing that programming block. Stan Lee would appear in the intros and talk about the characters introduced and discuss how he made them. As someone accustomed to these early look into 2000s, it feels weird seeing his younger self rather than the appearance I know him best after seeing him in Marvel films made in that era. But yeah, those segments were fine on their own, though reruns sadly removed them. Now, we are probably familiar with Iron Man nowadays thanks to the popularity of the first movie perfectly popping up after the success of the 2007 Transformers movie, as the writing, VFX, and overall cinematic style were similar to one another, making Iron Man like a pocket-friendly version of Transformers. Iron Man also spawned the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for better or worse, considering how it oversaturated the market, but back in the day, Iron Man wasn't as popular as Spider-Man or the X-Men, and Robert Downey Jr.'s career was not in the same light as it is today. And what about the actual Iron Man TV show? Well, it's kind of okay. The intro alone gives off the Masters of the Universe type of influence, with the way it's just good guys versus bad guys and a battle between Iron Man and his friends, and the Mandarin and his friends. Mandarin wants that Stark tech, and Tony can't let him do that.
The intro kind of showcases some of the other characters that step in the battle alongside Iron Man and the Mandarin, with Whirlwind and Dread Knight and Bonanza, Backlash and the Grey Gargoyle joining Mandy, while the War Machine, Hawkeye, Sentry, Scarlet Witch, and Spider-Man Woman pop up in the intro. Though for some reason, Rhodey gets to have his shout while the other heroes don't. Also, the way this theme song is composed combined with the cheesy name shouts kind of shows how strangely dated this series feels compared to the X-Men series. Feeling like it belongs to the 80s is not bad, but it's not that great either. And the show itself feels just like something we fight in the 80s. I like how we have the original stories to show that it's possible to do more than just adapt to more established comic events, but it felt pretty episodic. Most of the characters that don't get any development, and it comes off as a pretty unsatisfying from start to finish. There have been some nice story beats here and there, like how the Mandarin was so secretly spying on Tony Stark, but the end result feels so at best when they both have identities in the same room, with Tony as an android and Iron Man being the real deal underneath.
This sort of format for the series just makes it feel kind of flat compared to what the X-Men established. It's a fine watch, but it's not going to be all that impressive. And the animation itself is decent compared to its fellow Action Hour partner, which we'll get to. But who the hell thought it'd be a great idea to make a scene where the helmet goes onto Tony's head transitions from cell animation to CGI? I know that there had to be some cost cutting with the stock footage, but was this the best way to compensate for it? Anyways, Season 2 gives us a major overhaul for its representation and writing for the series, which is kind of an apt summary of going from Season 1 to Season 2 in the series. How they made the change can alone be seen in the opening intro. Gone is the 80s Masters of the Universe-esque opening with a more impressive display of Iron Man, now with longer hair a la Mark Bright's version of the character, creating these suits in his lab. I should mention that Iron Man's different suits were made to sell toys, but unlike X-Men's later toy lines, it makes sense since Iron Man's own armors provide unique abilities from one another, and the redesigned armor he has is much more badass than the regular one, considering the fact that it's the modular design best seen in the 90s comics and Marvel vs. Capcom. Good job. And who can forget the chorus going "I am Iron Man" in the best way of saying the line possible during the theme song.
This time the storylines are more serialized, as we get into new themes that the previous season didn't get to cover due to its priorities being wrong. One of them relates to Rhodey, aka War Machine, who's been afraid of being near his suit after nearly drowning while wearing it. Before overcoming the fear, we also have the reminder of how the consequences make different effects depending on the circumstances of the Force, like with the Force Source disbanding, leading to conflict between Tony and Hawkeye for most of the series, and the Mandarin now seeking 10 rings after they were drained of power and separated. Only he is now popping up infrequently. These changes make it for a more fitting way of making the Iron Man series. The Masters of Universe style was kind of interesting considering how it has a lot of characters involved, but the way it was executed made it feel unimpressive compared to the season 2. In fact, this overhaul is so massive that you could probably see the shows being as different versions of each other, even if you don't know they were from the same universe. It led to a pretty good finale for the series, while the Mandarin finally defeated the rest of the henchmen, even MODOK being arrested. It's a shame the series was cancelled due to low ratings, but that's not the only show to have a similar fate.
Remember when the Fantastic Four used to be proudly presented by Marvel until the morons at Disney tried to write their existence off for a while just because Fox owned the rights to the movies? Well, even with them owning the rights now, they really haven't done anything that major apart from slowly allowing merchandise to be prominent and adding a role for a version of Mr. Fantastic in Multiverse of Madness. Great. While the average MCU fan would only give a fuck about the team if they were getting a movie, I was around when Fantastic Four was a big deal. I would see the mid-2000s era movie duology, get a chance at checking out their guest appearances in Ultimate Alliance and Rise of the Imperfects, and even read some comics if I got lucky. I also saw this TV show, though I swear despite there being commercial bumpers saying that the 1967 Fantastic Show was on Boomerang, I never saw it air, so it was only the 90s series that gave me my Fantastic Four fix. And honestly, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's not as bad as a certain show we'll get to, but if it weren't for its second season, it would probably be just as terrible.
It tried to mimic the 1960s outfit, so it makes sense given how it was the most well-known aspect of the team. But there were issues that fan had in season 1. Firstly, the animation shit compared to X-Men. Even that the series had animation errors, it didn't feel as cheap as Fantastic Four's animation. The difference feels somewhat night and day, with X-Men feeling more like an evolution, while Fantastic Four felt like a devolution. And the way they tried to add humor with the landlady was so fucking stupid. Joan Lee appearing in the Marvel media along with her husband is always nice to see, but I wish she got a role that wasn't terrible for the show. Going forward but backwards is a trend of the series. Like, yeah, it was cool to see Silver Surfer and Galactus early on, and that was an element of the comic series that made the Fantastic Four iconic, for the inclusion of space as part of their adventures, but it doesn't have much going for it. At least in the first season, it got even made fun of within the issue 396 of the Fantastic Four comic series, where Ant-Man made fun of the TV series. Funny how that was a no in Marvel's eyes, but the Ultimate Spider-Man making fun of the Sam Raimi movie is fine in their eyes. Even if people love that movie but hate the Fantastic Four show, at least season 1.
Also, the first episode had the Puppet Master die after he fell from the apartment window, but the Fantastic Four claimed he just vanished. Either they weren't aware of what happened to him, or they tried to censor his death. Season 2, however, was an impressive comeback. We get a new intro that replaces the cheesy one from Season 1 with a more dynamic animation, a better showcase of the Fantastic Four's adventures, and a superior orchestral that doesn't have the lyrics that you'd find from a rejected 80s version of the series. The writing is also much better done than with the first season. likely owing to the fact that it was more inspired by the John Byrne era of the comic series, which is ironic because while Tom Teteronowitz, and I do apologize for mispronouncing your name, wrote Season 2, Ron Friedman, who I met a while back at TFCon, was the writer of the lighter tone Season 1, despite being the writer of the darker tone 1986 Transformers movie. We sadly have fewer intros with Stan Lee, but the improvements done towards the series in Season 2 are worth it nonetheless. Apart from the guest appearances of characters like Daredevil, Hulk, Thor, Black Panther, and Ghost Rider, among other Marvel characters, we have more interesting events this time around.
From the Inhuman saga featuring their debut and battle between Galactus, and even a historic arc where we got both Sue getting shrapnel and part of her brain with surgery being a necessity for her to survive, in addition to Franklin Storm's shitty past before he dies in the series with a bomb strapped to him. It's a miracle we got more of an engaging story rather than a repeat of all the mistakes that Season 1 made. Sadly, we were this close to continuing the greatness that Season 3 would have given us a story arc, where not only Sue Storm is pregnant, but we also have other characters taking on the role of the fourth member of Fantastic Four, Namor, Medusa, and She-Hulk will pop in and contribute to the series in one way or another. But alas, it wasn't the case. The cancellation of Season 3 was. As Scott Lang pointed out, due to the poor ratings of the series, just like with Iron Man, doing a first good impression matters the most. While X-Men suffered from animation errors, it still won fans over because of how engaging it was as a show compared to Iron Man's weird fantasy vibe of Season 1, and the cheaper, almost everything version of Fantastic Four's first season. However, another show would be much more impressive than either Iron Man or Fantastic Four.
I already covered the show in my massive Spider-Man retrospective, but while that video was more like a conversation based around reminiscing of the good old days, this will be more of a normal review, so chances are you might have seen this show the most among other Fox Kids Marvel series. So you might know about how Peter's trying to balance his normal life and his Spider-Man responsibilities. Academics, work, and his social life are what he normally deals with constantly, but when he dons a mask, he's got tons of villains that want him dead. Luckily, this is where we get to see him team up with numerous other Marvel superheroes every once in a while. But let's get into how the series was made for a moment. Marvel Films Animation took over the production of the show rather than Saban, making it produced in-house rather than outsourced. The show is also where we get to see how much the television adaptation side of things has changed over the years. This is a true next step in the evolution towards how we see the web slinger in animation. And what better decade than the 90s to display such a leap in quality?
The art style remained consistently great all throughout the series, which didn't suffer from the animation errors as much as X-Men did, nor did it feel cheap as the Fantastic Four's first season. The more dynamic art style helped the characters stand out a lot more than in the past, especially when it comes to the villains having a threatening aura that wasn't easily pulled off at the time. It's especially interesting how Venom's got both blue and red shading on him, making me think of a police siren. Granted, the CGI skyscrapers in New York City look dated, and there are some instances of reused animations for when the characters talk at times, but the former still managed to make the environments look faithful to the actual New York City from around the mid-90s. The writing, on top of adding layers to the tone of the show, was courtesy of a few experts that observed the comics. Hell, even a few people like Derek Conaway and Marty Eisenberg were from another equally great superhero show of the 90s, Batman the Animated Series. So we have writers from a great TV show continue being great writers while working on another great show. You love to see it.
Speaking of things people love to see, we get tons of characters throughout the franchise. So many villains for Spider-Man to fight against, from the mainstays like Doc Ock and Green Goblin, to the somewhat uncommon foes like Kingpin and Morbius, and somewhat like Harley Quinn, Venom and Carnage received massive popularity thanks to this series, considering they were fairly new additions to the Spider lore. Every once in a while, we'd have other Marvel heroes lend a hand for the web-slinger, with Daredevil and Punisher being two examples that most likely contributed in the city, while some crossover events had the likes of the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, and Captain America show up. Some may not really like the Secret Wars story as much, though I did enjoy having some form of larger connectivity between the Marvel shows in a way that was comparable to the DCAU, as sadly, we didn't really get an equivalent show towards Justice League Unlimited. And we'll get to the actual Avengers series that was made later on, because there are certain things we have to talk about with that one. But for a more well-received multi-hero event, we got an actual Spider-Verse story in the form of Spider-Wars, long before we got the Spider-Verse comic, the 2018 movie of the similar name, and the MCU's No Way Home. but instead of the likes of Miles and Gwen Stacy, we instead had Ben Reilly along with a Mexid Spider-Man, another Spidey with Doc Ock's arms, one with 6 arms that are actually part of him, and an actor who would later introduce our world Spider-Man to Stan Lee. That's a nice way for fans to enjoy the last episode, even if we were going to get another adventure.
Though while it wasn't given the same criticism that was applied towards Iron Man and Fantastic Four shows, this series was instead noteworthy for how censored they got. For the most part, they weren't allowed to use realistic guns, yet the flashbacks were perfectly fine, which was likely due to their use in telling a story. Since Spider-Man probably had a wider audience than X-Men, there were some rules that meant we couldn't have punching broken glass from the people throwing each other, as well as having kids in danger, and for some reason, the word sinister was forbidden. Temper, one of the writers, continued denying the exaggerated nature of the censorship. But at the time, it was said that Marvel couldn't do anything about it due to their bankruptcy. Speaking of which, we have to commend him for only finding Spider-Man the best adaptation before 1994 while studying the production of the show, because all of the other adaptations made before 1994 kind of sucked. So yeah, that part of Marvel having no control must be one of the more unusual parts of making a show. Another weird part would include how, despite the iconic theme song made by Chucky Levi and the Aerosmith member Joe Perry, the background music was made in Israel rather than the US due to it being more affordable to make music in the former country rather than at home. Not complaining since the music is top tier, but it's still weird behind the scenes.
Regardless, this is a fantastic show that does Spider-Man justice in ways that no other show before it succeeded. From translating the numerous story arcs to depicting the characters' dual identity stories, this show is what we call peak Spider-Man media. And the only other shows that rival it are the MTV and Spectacular iterations. It's certainly a favorite among many Marvel fans who grew up with this universe, and other iterations of Spider-Man as well. Sadly, this show faced cancellation after 65 episodes, which is due to the budget decreasing and New World, the producer of the show, shutting down. At the very least, in spite of there being plans for Spidey to save Mary Jane and resolve some of the story of the arcs of the villains post-Spider Wars, John Silver was content with ending the show on a fairly high note.
Most series can't live up to a conclusion due to the ratings or stories that haven't gone anywhere, but it's nice to see that Spider-Man isn't on a cliffhanger. Even so, we can always imagine him having his journey continue while seeing the Stan Lee cameo as a fitting farewell. We still miss you, Stan.
You see, kids, and by kids I mean MCU consumers, this show knows how to do the Hulk justice. This show of the not-so-jolly Green Giant continues the increase in quality that hadn't been seen with previous iterations of the character's animated adventures. From the effects of war to the conflict Bruce shares with not just the military, but his own rogues gallery, usually consisting of the likes of the Leader, Abomination, and the Outcasts. This should be another slam dunk to go along with the X-Men and Spider-Man series, right? Well, I should mention that this show doesn't really get into the same conversations that those two entries have, and even if it were to, it'd likely go from positive to sort of negative due to a similar issue that we saw with Iron Man and Fantastic Four, only this time, it's reverse. We'll get to that later on, but first, let's go over the first season.
It's great that we already established who the Hulk is in the series, as the intro gets to the point of Hulk's origins, as well as his sheer power. In the first season, we have him on the loose before he is held captive by the Leader, who strives to be the same power of the Beast within. Meanwhile, Betty Ross and Doc Samson try to find a cure for Bruce Banner in order to remove the gamma radiation within him. Most of the beef that a human has against the Hulk is found from none other than Thunderbolt Ross, who uses a gamma-powered laser that Bruce made against the inventor while also having a personal disdain towards both sides of Banner. While all this happens, the Hulk has to form alliances with Gargoyle in order to get a cure for Betty and many other people, while also saving Jennifer Walter's life after she was injured by Dr. Doom. And yes, we got team-ups with the Fantastic Four, which is great since by that point the show got better. Also, with the blood transfusion that the Jennifer receives, she is now able to transform into the She-Hulk and chooses to remain as such.
We also get to see Iron Man War Machine cross over into the show, which leads to a battle against an army of Hulkbusters led by Ross and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Gabriel Jones, requiring the Armored Adventures to team up with Rick Jones while finding Bruce Banner. Another crossover event that we got revolved around the Fantastic Four, with Dr. Doom surviving his defeat from Season 2 of the show he came from, while allowing She-Hulk to have revenge on him for the attack he did to her long ago. We would see the Fantastic Four again as they went on vacation, and even Thor got to be in this series after popping up in their show too. Oh, and somehow She-Hulk was with the Avengers in the Fantastic Four finale, even though she would later on pop up in this series. Shrug. Apart from the crossovers and epic nature of the Hulk in animation, it was great seeing how there's a bit of redemption in some characters displaying their humanity as they realize the consequences of the things they do. Like Sasquatch when he decided to go into exile after he harmed a friend of the Hulk named Taylor. It's pretty neat seeing other stuff like this in addition to the quest for cures done from the gamma radiation's outbreak.
Season 1 was a pretty strong showing, especially when it came out not just the standard battles and the quest for cures, but we also get to see attempts made to separate the Hulk from Bruce Banner, as well as seeing the cracks in the affiliation between Gargoyle and the leader and the beef between General Roche and the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Gabriel Jones. And when we got to the part where the two sides of our titular green giant are finally separated, we had a pretty base season finale considering of the way that the Hulk became a mindless beast while Bruce had to fight against it with a responsibility he had on his back for his association with the Hulk, and we have even get to see the leader take his power before he starts to get fucked in the head. All of this, and we still haven't got into the final part. So Bruce starts to slowly die and realizes he must reunite the Hulk before both of them die. While they're brought together at first, the experiment goes wrong as Drake gets crosswired and it results in becoming the Hulk while Dr. Banner becomes the Grey Hulk instead.
Season 1 was no joke when it comes to providing the goods to make a great story for the Hulk as a TV show, and since we have both X-Men and Spider-Man, both of which were able to stay as consistently good TV shows throughout their runs, in contrast to Iron Man and Fantastic Four shows starting off poorly by having a major overhaul for the latter halves, we've wondered if Season 2, now with the subtitle and She-Hulk in air quotations, manages to continue the same quality that we got. Sadly, it really didn't. It was because UPN, which, hold up, I need to bring this up. So at first, I thought UPN airing The Incredible Hulk was because they owned the rights to the Marvel characters' televisual appearances, which might be from UPN and CBS somehow being part of Paramount and Viacom. But no, the merger of CBS and Viacom was much later, so it turned out UPN was impressed with how X-Men was getting attention and wanted some of that Marvel pie themselves. They were probably given the ability to share some airing rights to the Fantastic Four and Iron Man shows in the meantime. But anyways, UPN's execs were unsure of how to handle the show, especially when it came to Season 2 with the changes they did.
It starts off strong, right? With the Grey Hulk as well as the She-Hulk not having to lay low after a hellish experience in court. Now they have to go after Rick Jones, Hulk. Both of the Green and Grey Hulks battle each other over who can control Bruce Banner. And it was cool seeing characters like Doctor Strange show up in one episode that focused on She-Hulk's past. We not only have that, but we even get an episode where Strange and SH try to break the mind control of demon aliens control from the Hulk, who is now the Dark Hulk. Oh, and the Grey Hulk becomes Mr. Fix-It as part of a mob persona. But there is a small problem here. A lot of the side characters are having to be removed from the story, with some of the arcs having no continuation from what happened due to them being removed from this time around. It'd be fine if we got them at least once in a while, now that Bruce and Jennifer are on the run. But nothing major really pays off, and the military practically just feels non-existent at times, especially Ross, who is now just hospitalized.
And the thing that was reminiscent of the first seasons of our Action Hour duo was the lighter tone that wasn't well received with fans. UPN wanted to appeal to the female audience, and it resulted in the show getting a lighter tone, though no theme song to accompany it. But fans were not happy with the change, given how the first season's darker tone and the comic influences were praised by them much more by comparison. I feel like whereas nowadays we're fatigued with people either bringing up the keywords woke or SJW for that stupid Disney Plus She-Hulk show, the same way people are tired of hearing their criticisms of said show follow up with genius comments like, "Oh, you hate fun. If you hate the She-Hulk, you sexist MAGA person." But back then, it was a much more straightforward approach towards criticizing the second season of Hulk. UPN didn't have any idea of how to handle the series, so rather than give the show to Fox and Marvel so they can add on to it their way, we got an opposite problem that happened with Fantastic Four and Iron Man. Granted, it's not as bad as those first seasons, but it's still a major letdown since it's close to being in the same conversations like with X-Men and Spider-Man.
You know, before making this video, I had no idea there was a Silver Surfer TV show. I know he was popular and all, but I forgot about this one till now. Anyway, this show is best known for being closer to Jack Kirby art style rather than the most recent art style like the one Jim Lee had for other animated shows. It also used CGI a little more often, probably more so than the skyscrapers in Spider-Man. It didn't feature the Fantastic Four from the iconic Galactus trilogy, which was a funny precursor to the characters being removed or replaced in Marvel movies due to their rights. But we go on from a comic quest with various characters from different worlds in a deeper form of lore that had not been touched up the Fox Kids Marvel Universe up until that point. This time, the Silver Surfer has to contend with Galactus after he nearly consumed his home planet, though Thanos is also involved with pulling the strings with the help of Ego, the living planet. We also get a variety of other characters that are more niche in the Marvel Universe, such as Pip the Troll, Adam Warlock, and the Watcher. Though Drax the Destroyer isn't so niche now, thanks to the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and their portrayal of the characters starting strong in the first movie. Going down in Volume 2, weirdly enough, Lady Chaos is the character Thanos served rather than Death.
The serialized approach in this show is pretty cool, as it allows fans to appreciate a more ongoing story in a way that hadn't been done quite like it in the past few shows. And much like the comics it adapted, various commentaries are made around topics tackling slavery, environmental deterioration, peace, imperialism, which once again, is better done here than in a lot of modern media, especially in kids' shows. It also helps that it's homaging older literature in order to prove that a piece of superhero media can be more than just entertainment. Even the titles of some of the episodes, as well as a few of the characters' names, homage a golden age of science fiction. I'll be honest and say that the series as a whole had potential to remain strong, and probably one of the best entries in the Fox Kids Marvel Universe, but sadly, it lasted so shortly.
We were at the part where Thanos was reversing time while the Silver Surfer couldn't do shit about it. And the moment I realized that was the final episode they aired, I felt like Woody in Toy Story 2 after finding out that the finale for Woody's Roundup got axed. As it turned out, plenty of issues kept it from going forward. The ratings themselves might have been high, but it appears that the Marvel decision to cancel the show revolved around them recovering from bankruptcy, which, as we mentioned earlier, was the problem. So they ran off into during the 90s, explaining why they sold off a lot of movie rights before the 2000s. Another issue that came up to the fact that there was an ongoing legal dispute between Marvel and Saban, likely over ownership, while one was sort of crumbling and the other was also trying to survive. Marvel show getting axed was around the same time that Saban was struggling to decide how to use their budget for their own project until it was decided to cancel most of their self-produced shows and only do Power Rangers with the success of In Space, leading to a Lost Galaxy up into the wild forest during the purchase of Fox Family Network from Disney. Marvel, on the other hand, was struggling even more so.
The biggest issue with the TV show has got to be continuity. The different art style isn't anything that breaks its consistency, as you can say it helps go with the homage of Jack Kirby's art style, but the portrayal of the Silver Surfer is different here than in the Fantastic Four. In that show, he couldn't leave Earth that easily, but he has the ability to do so in his own solo show. Speaking of, they were about to be present in Season 2, along with more characters and backstory after we got a conclusion to that cliffhanger that the series ended on, with there being a quest for the Virals to return to Zenla, as well as Terrax being the Mix Herald for Galactus. And there would even be the Kree Skull War. The Fantastic Four would have popped up, and then they'd team up along with Nova to stop the new villain duo once and for all. So word of advice for all you people making shows like these, be sure to have your episodes produced as much as possible, because you'll never know what your network can do to you. At the very least, fans got to see a crossover between one of the most powerful beings in anime history and the Silver Surfer. Yes, King of the Hill is canon in the Fox Kids Marvel Universe. Once again, I covered the series in my podcast video where all the different versions of Spider-Man were given a retrospective. But since we went all in with the Spider-Man series earlier, let's go over Unlimited as well. This show has a fairly small cult following, though it certainly got shrouded by the fame of the earlier Marvel shows and the like. Plenty of reasons why that was the case. But production-wise, it was kind of a nightmare. At first, Saban wanted to make a cheaper adaptation of the original 26 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, probably as some origin story of them wanting to do the standard approach that manga to anime conversions have compared to the comic books and TV shows having different events and characters play out from one another. That idea was scrapped because of the deal between Sony and Marvel to make a Spider-Man movie using the traditional source material that Saban was not given permission to borrow. In other words, Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man movie was in development, so Saban had to do something new. They first had an idea that Spidey was stranded on a counter-Earth where Ben Parker did not die, meaning there would be no reason for Peter to resist the Venom symbiote. Marvel said no, stating that there can't be two Peter Parkers.
This was also made after Marvel decided not to make a Spider-Man 2099 cartoon, as it did not want to get the accusations thrown towards them for copying what DC did with Batman Beyond. Though this show had a bit of a Batman Beyond vibe to it, the futuristic vibe, darker visuals, and a different kind of suit for the heroes, and why not add a subtitle of some kind to make the name seem even cooler. Beyond and Unlimited were actually different from one another, as Unlimited took place in Counter-Earth rather than a future version of the same city, like with Batman Beyond, whereas Peter Parker still remains Spider-Man because he did not reach the same age of retirement. Terry took over the role as Batman after Bruce Wayne retired the mantle due to old age, and the morals being broken once. Even the story is different from Beyond, which we shall go over right now. After Spider-Man failed to stop Venom and Carnage from boarding a shuttlecraft that John Jameson was piloting toward Counter-Earth, Triple J puts up a bounty on the webhead, forcing our hero to turn into Reed Richards to make a new suit with improved technology featuring stealth, nanotech, and sonic capabilities to aid him on his hunt for the future symbiotic deal.
After he goes to Counter-Earth thanks to an initially reluctant Nick Fury, Spider-Man discovers Jameson and a group of freedom fighters who are against a high evolutionary, consisting of bestials who possess animal and human elements to treat normal humans as second-class minorities. Jameson initially didn't want to leave Counter-Earth until the bestials as a whole were taken care of, but Spider-Man decides to stay, continuing his dual life just like in the earlier show. And yeah, this is a loose continuation of the original Spider-Man series. I'm pretty sure fans who aren't well versed with this series would think otherwise, but it's not a reboot, but instead a sequel. While taking on the many members of the High Evolutionary, it turns out that Venom and Carnage are also on the planet, controlled by the Symphonic, which is a hive of Counter-Earth symbiotes that make us think of Australian spider infestations more than anything. At one point, we not only see John turn into a man-wolf, but we get to see heroic versions of the Green Goblin and Vulture. Even Counter-Earth versions of Kraven the Hunter and Electro pop up. Everything seemed in order even in spite of those production problems, so why did it end so quickly?
Yeah, it lasted around the same duration as Silver Surfer, but while the financial issues were the biggest factor of Silver Surfer's end, the popularity of Pokemon caused the show to end. Yes, Spider-Man Unlimited lost to Pokemon, which was expected because the show was new and was a part of the anime boom of the 90s, but even if Spider-Man Unlimited tried to push as many ratings as it can, Fox Kids generally struggle to maintain popularity, falling behind Kids, Warner Bros., Nickelodeon, and ABC. There are a few scripts of season 2, though they never got to conclude the cliffhanger due to the episodes being unproduced. Also, it turned out that there's a 13-episode contract for the Spider-Man series, which makes me wonder why they chose to have the series on a cliffhanger, that there was a contract that limited the possibility of the 2 seasons. Marvel in the late 90s was such a pain to look back on, I tell you.
The show is also criticized for having no common ground with the comics, since fans felt it clashed with the idea of wanting to make it feel like the original few issues. They did love the art style of the show, and it did pop up in some other franchises, like the year 2000 video game, the suit being references an alternate version of the said character encountering Morlun and dying from him, and also teaming up with different other Spider-Man shows in Spider-Verse. It also showed that Mary Jane Watson was not with Peter and the symbiotes were no longer on the loose, at least in other worlds up until Unlimited, so I guess that solves the small cliffhanger of the original series. I expect this to be retconned if we ever get a Spider-Man 97.
Alright, that takes care of it all, right? We're done with the Fox Kids Marvel shows, then we wrap things up and move on to the next time's calls for another video, right?
And here we finally are at the last ever series made in the Fox Kids Marvel Universe, and it's probably the one fans hate the most amongst all entries.
Wait, worse than the first season of Fantastic Four?
Yes, it's even worse.
And we're still in the era of short-lived Marvel shows, right?
Oh yeah.
I think I'm going to be sick.
I'll let you keep it together in the meantime. Anyways, Avengers United They Stand is based around the West Coast Avengers of 1984, consisting of Wasp, Wonder Man, Tigra, and 2 regulars from the Iron Man series in the form of Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch. Led by Giant Man, we later see Falcon and Vision pop up as members of the team afterwards. However, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, 3 Avengers that were practically the equivalent of the DC Trinity, were nowhere to be found outside of a flashback for Cap, a single guest appearance for Iron Man, and poor Thor getting relegated to the intro and nothing else. I'm debating if this is worse than his deterioration in the MCU since Endgame. Apparently, the big 3 of the Avengers were prioritized in movies getting made, but we wouldn't get any of those movies until 2008 for Iron Man and 2011 for Cap and Thor. So this whole licensing thing makes my head hurt more than anything. Throughout the show, the Avengers take on the likes of Ultron, King the Conqueror, the Masters of Evil, the Grim Reaper, and even Zodiac. Other characters like the Swordsman, Namor, and Assalium 7 were also there too. A shit ton of characters in 13 episodes. It'll be hard to tell if it was worth it given, well, everything else.
Okay, I'll give them credit for the references to the history of the characters, showcasing just how far back the Marvel Universe goes from the 60s to the last year of the 20th century. We got the past chemistry of Falcon and Captain America, and the fact that Hawkeye is partially deaf, and the half-breed nature Namor, but some of these were not expanded upon, which has been a frequent issue for the character development of the Avengers. Granted, it might not have been possible without how many characters were crammed into 13 episodes. In addition to the writers running around trying to make whatever United they stand out to be, but Jesus Christ was of all that set aside in favor of doing what Batman and Robin did. Being toyetic, and some of the characters wore battle armor, which would be fine for the cosmetics, but they wanted to use all the gear as ways to have the characters delve into other situations that will kind of neglect certain characters' powers and the like. We praise Superman for delving away with the idea despite Bruce Timm delivering his powers in the animated series, but we can't see the name for this show.
This show felt like it was doomed from the start. In addition to having an Avengers cartoon, there was going to be a Captain America series, which would have been written by Robert N. Skir and Marty Eisenberg, but the bankruptcy Marvel was experiencing at the time kept them from delving into either show. By the time Marvel was recovering, the Avengers project was brought up, though only the Bible of the writer duo was used, because the two were already making this Transformers show Beast Machines. The sad thing is that we would have had these talented writers, yet the end result was a disappointment in comparison to the previous shows of the Fox Kids Marvel Universe. Superhero shows being made to sell toys wasn't really a thing you'd find since they're normally meant to be about storytelling. Granted, some characters were meant to have merchandising opportunities, but was the Avengers really the best choice for it? And apparently, this was a show that was made to capitalize on the success of Batman Beyond? The futuristic setting would have been cool to have, but again, it feels more like a carryover from the previous Marvel show ideas rather than something that makes sense for the story.
You know what the worst thing was? I was hoping this would be the perfect counterpoint to the Justice League cartoon we get a year later. But this show is the opposite of Justice League. And I don't mean the characters and the company. Everything about this show is a massive disappointment and failure the Fox Kids Marvel Universe was. The worst part is that some of this wasn't at the fault of the writers, since the financial problems of Marvel were responsible for the troubles of the production, anything that was under Saban and any of the companies that made in their movies. After the series, the Fox Kids Marvel Universe would no longer make a new show for a long time. Marvel would have a few shows to tie in with their numerous movies in the 2000s, but the Fox Kids Marvel Universe ended with United Day Sans.
When I was younger, I didn't really think of any issues with these shows. Maybe they spoke a little too fast for me to comprehend, but I enjoyed these shows overall. It also helped, or I guess didn't help depending on the context, that I was watching these shows on Jetix, with almost all of them being prominent in terms of reruns and marketing before Disney got their grubby mitts on the Marvel brand. Later on, I got curious about the behind-the-scenes stuff, as well as how they hold up. And if there is a common theme I can find with the Fox Kids Marvel Universe, it's gotta be inconsistency. The DCAU has proven to remain with as much quality as it possibly can, even if there was a stupid merchandise sales reason for Static Shock's cancellation, or the needlessness of Zeta Project. So seeing that Marvel had to struggle with half of its library was pretty sad to look back on. In fact, we've gotten up and down on a quality map for the series, as X-Men started at a higher state before it went down with Iron Man and Fantastic Four before they went up in Season 2, in addition to the release of Spider-Man, and we have a strong start for Hulk before Season 2 went to shit for that show, and who can forget how short-lived Silver Surfer and Unlimited were while trying to remain strong before Avengers went downhill.
Like what Marvel presented with their stab at a fair universe that is animated and whatnot, but there is just so much that pulls it back from being peak material the same way the DCAU has. It's not because of brand loyalty. I may run a fan page of a DC superhero, but I still wish that the Fox Kids Marvel shows were able to have equal animation quality and writing standards. While the X-Men and Spider-Man remained strong, but Iron Man and Fantastic Four only became good when their second seasons arrived. Why couldn't the UPN keep the Incredible Hulk from flopping in Season 2 when Season 1 was good? Silver Surfer and Spider-Man Unlimited being short-lived is something we can't blame Marvel for since they had financial problems, but United Day Stand still sucks. Though they may have lasted for a shorter duration of time, but technically never left us from the franchise's ended. Half of these fans were around to see them during the Fox Kids days. But when DC used the Fox Family Network long before they bought Marvel and the 21st Century Fox, they made reruns of these shows on the ABC Family and Jetix, along with other shows that were program blocked. Sir, you grew up with Jetix, right? Tell us about it.
Alright, I've been waiting for this part. Okay, so there were plenty of shows that were present on Jetix that I really loved. I did enjoy Nickelodeon, even if they weren't too interested with action shows. I have seen Cartoon Network's Toonami from time to time, mostly with my cousins. But Jetix was where it was at for me. Power Rangers from both the old Saban and Disney eras, competitive anime that was vaguely in a similar style to Pokemon and seen with Digimon and Beyblade, random shit like Yin Yang Yo and Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go. But the shows that truly stuck in my mind were all the Power Ranger seasons spanning from Mighty Morphin to RPM, even though that latter one was only on ABC Kids, and the Marvel shows that once aired on Fox. They were obviously in response to the success that the movies got, as X-Men and Spider-Man were getting a lot of attention from fans. Granted, a lot of MCU consumers would see early 2000s Marvel as only bad just because of Ben Affleck's Daredevil, or Elektra, or 2004 Punisher, but nah, the early 2000s of Marvel is a grand old time, if you ask me. I think there was even some reruns of the pre-90s Spider-Man media back when we had his 40th anniversary, along with tying in with the first movie. Apart from the promos and being excited from when we see new shows because of whatever is being tied in with a new movie, or newly made shows that did their own thing separately from the series. So yeah, the Fox Kids Marvel Universe didn't really go away, as it was able to coexist alongside the newer Marvel shows that came out at the time before everything was homogenized in either the Disney XD universe or the MCU. I still miss when we used to have separate plans for the Marvel brand as a whole, with unique ideas for one another while still presenting a lasting impression if they stuck around for more than a single season. And now, here is something we wanted to go over. These two franchises are pretty similar to one another, while also presenting differences beyond the characters that they each own, so why not run down the similarities and differences between the DC Animated Universe and the Fox Kids Marvel Universe. Similarity 1. Equally strong beginnings.
Batman and X-Men kicked off their franchises with a great first season that had resulted in the same level of praise that hasn't been seen from previous superhero shows. We only went in full detail over what made X-Men great, and did a similar thing for the Batman. But man, did both shows keep us happy for a long time.
Similarity 2. Maintaining mature themes. While two of the Marvel shows didn't stick with the approach, both animated universes made sure that their audiences were not just getting action as a frequent element of the show. We got to learn about plenty of more mature backstories to various characters, whether revolved around the tragic loss of a loved one or having any experience of discrimination. They were also the perfect balance of being approachable for kids and great for older fans, on top of being better written than most attempts at having deep themes in kids' shows. Even to this day, I'd say. Similarity 3. Frequent crossovers.
Compared to the modern trend of hyping up cameos more than the actual quality of movies we see in the MCU and DCU, fans of the past were treating crossovers like surprises. They're more than just cameos and characters standing next to each other, as they all got to actually work together and use the success of the shows as a way to make the crossovers feel more exciting. And they do so in ways that actually feel clever. Just as using Batman and Static Shock, not to only confirm that the two characters coexist, but they also have a more elaborate approach towards their team up. While everyone nowadays goes crazy for when someone shows up for a few seconds on a movie or show, that is much more satisfying to go back to when we had a substance in our crossovers. Nothing beats the way that Tony and Rhodey put JJ in his place after the shit season.
Similarity 4. Perfect mix of new and established actors. Nowadays, we usually see voice actors from casting pools getting attention for what a new disposable show or anime gets, but back then, both franchises had a pretty good mix of already established actors with fairly new faces. People already knew Mark Hamill thanks to Star Wars, long before he played Joker to DCAU, but Kevin Conroy was fairly new to those that hadn't seen him in theatrical plays before Batman. Meanwhile, you had Norm Spencers, who mostly was stuck with Canadian voice roles in cartoons, while Ed Asner, voice of Triple J, was not only a voice actor, but also the former president of the Screen Actors Guild. In the modern time period of mostly non-union dudes and dudettes voicing characters in modern media that doesn't last long unless it's part of an established franchise, it's great to see how the then new and the already prominent got to work together in the past. Similarity 5. Spin-offs made from main shows of each universe.
Batman and Spider-Man got their share of spin-offs as they both have the similarity from Show Beyond and unlimited subtitles, though they're different in terms of the actual meat and potatoes they share. Of course, Batman and Superman would share a show before we got Justice League, though I argue it's more of a transition taking us from the world's finest to the league itself. This Fantastic Four also has a spin-off in the form of Silver Surfer, though I can see why some people will find it hard to see the connections given the animation style and the absence of the Fantastic Four. I guess you could say the Avengers United they stand as a spin-off of Iron Man, but let's be real here. With how much Iron Man improved in the season 2, it's best not to lump United's streaming pile of shit onto the show.
Similarity 6. Batman and Spider-Man serving as centerpieces of sorts. While Batman did get his show before Spider-Man, it makes sense that Spidey was the character that had a bit of a central role in the FKMU for the most part, since he was the one to actually unite plenty of heroes, in addition to having a show that lasted as long as Batman's. And of course, both of them got to have the standard entries before he got to Beyond and Unlimited, as we mentioned before. And it's funny how this is from way before the Avengers took over the popularity and when Marvel made sure the promo art looked like the MCU, and how Superman had to wait to get a spotlight for his own show after the popularity of the 1989 Batman movie. And considering who gets all the movies, games, shows, etc., yeah, I feel bad for Superman. Similarity 7. Both universes ended with the crossover shows.
Well, as much as we'd like to compare Avengers United, they stand with a much better Justice League. We'd rather stick with going straight to the differences.
Difference 1. Budget. Every DCAU show received a high budget, even if some of the shows like Static Shock and Zeta Project had a little less funding than the other shows, likely due to Warner Bros. Already owning DC, while Marvel had to request money from Fox as they were dependent for the most part. As a result of this, we get a consistent form of quality control that was present throughout the DCAU, while X-Men suffered from having animation errors, and the first halves of the Marvel action duo coming with a flatter presentation than in their second seasons. Though it is telling with the fact that some shows get more attention than others, such as the case with Unlimited and Silver Surfer having a higher quality animation than United They Stand. One can argue that the animation style with Static Shock was a bit amateur, though it mostly came from it being made by a smaller team than with the other shows, given that it was a fairly new IP at the time. By comparison, most of the budget issues came from when Marvel had bankruptcy issues. Difference 2. Art style.
While the budgets would result in the quality of the show, the art styles being different was intentional by DC and Marvel. DC's aesthetics were done by a result in a stronger identity that made Batman the animated series, and the subsequent shows stand out from among the previous shows we got. While Marvel went with the homogen, the Jim Lee X-Men art style, to having the synergy with the comics as the redesigns were a part of the success that the series gathered at the time. Later, Marvel shows would take inspiration from the X-Men and either improve on it or look worse depending on the show. Both of them are good in their own ways, though we can't deny that the Marvel shows made since 2000 had more identity in terms of animation.
Difference 3. Character presentation. By this we mean in terms of who is taking the spotlight for the shows that make up each series. DC surprisingly had 4 pillars in terms of representing the lineup of shows, with Batman and Superman getting their own titles and being part of the Justice League, while Static Shock and Zeta Project were fairly new IPs. By contrast, Marvel had the X-Men, Iron Man, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Hulk, Silver Surfer, and the Avengers having shows of their own, a higher amount since one would expect a show from Wonder Woman or the Green Lantern Corps, and saying that reminds me of the current DC Extended Universe pain. Difference 4. Availability.
While Batman was initially on Fox Kids along with the likes of Animaniacs and Tiny Toon Avengers before they went to the other channels and whatnot, the DCAU as a whole was later to be found on Kids Warner Bros. As well as the Cartoon Network. Meanwhile, the Fox Kids Marvel show stuck with Fox, with a few of them being on the syndication, with the UK being known for airing Iron Man, Fantastic Four, and the Incredible Hulk. Then the Marvel shows would pop up on Jetix, though somehow Batman and Superman aired on that channel despite being Warner Bros. Shows and not Disney's. Then the same 2 shows popped up again on the Hub, which is best known for airing Transformers Prime and the one that showed the colorful horses that people used to have a crush on. The Hub actually made commercials where the voice actors read up the lines for the trailers promoting The Dark Knight Rises and Man of Steel.
And finally, difference 5, duration. Batman lasted 7 years on TV if you combine the regular animated series with New Adventures. Superman and Static Shock both lasted 4 years on their own, and the Justice League series lasted about 5 years. Meanwhile, Batman Beyond lasted 2 years, while Zeta Project only lasted about 1 year. The DCAU as a whole aired for 14 years on TV if you exclude any new movies or projects made since the end of JLU. By contrast, the X-Men series lasted for 5 years, both Iron Man and Fantastic Four lasted for 2 years, Spider-Man lasted about 4 years, and every show from The Incredible Hulk to Avengers United They Stand lasted for a year or less. The Fox Kids Marvel Universe lasted for about 8 years, and up until the recent edition of New Comic Stories and X-Men 97, there hasn't been as strong of a presence for the Fox Kids Marvel canon post United They Stand as there is with the DCAU post JLU.
Alright, we covered 2 universes in one go. God, that was a shit ton of talking. I gotta be honest, to say this discussion of the 290s animated universes is a breath of fresh air after all that cave shit circus on Twitter. Feels good to actually talk about it in a genuine manner rather than using it to boost some clout. I wish I could see these shows either when they were new or as reruns like you did with the Jetix and the Toonami.
However you got to experience these shows, I think that both the DCAU and Fox Kids Marvel Universe are great entries that can only be rivaled by the likes of X-Men Evolution, The Batman, not that Matt Reeves flick, the 2004 show, Teen Titans, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. This was a great pair of videos to make with you, AQ.
Thanks, Serge. And if you guys made it to the end of the video, we want to thank you for watching the entire video. If you want to see my content, I'm not on YouTube unfortunately, but I do run the Instagram page, DC_Baffleck on Instagram.
And when you're done with that, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you then.